You're about to listen to a podcast full of wonder, excitement, and discovery. It's time for an adventure through Odyssey. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Adventures Through Odyssey podcast, Odyssey Revisited. I'm Will here with John, and before we get started, we are going to try one of these discussion questions that a fan very nicely emailed us, and we would like to thank our fan, George Glass, for sending this in to us.
I feel like people will get that reference.
I guess we'll see.
I think people who listen to Odyssey as children also was probably shown that television show.
You're probably right. So the question is, because I was listening to some old episodes, and Tom is in a lot of these, and he's been out of the show since the reboot because the actor died. Now because we've already replaced Whit twice. I've had this question: when it comes to Eugene, do we replace Will Ryan or do we get rid of Eugene?
I think they will replace him. I think they're not, and I think they should replace him. I think they're not above replacing characters. I think there are times in the narrative I think they could have replaced Eugene. I think maybe if it had been during the hiatus, maybe you could have like the old hiatus. I think the biggest problem now is Eugene's story just entered a whole new phase. I mean, it's been like the father phase, but now it's like kind of like the father phase where it's not like, is he really a father and is Buck really his son sort of thing?
Absolutely. I actually agree with that. One, I think it's going to set a weird precedent if we always replace Whit, but every other character just kind of leaves the show.
Well, yeah, I think that like Tom and I think that's part of it. Tom came at a time where it was like kind of easy to phase him out.
I was about to say, by the time Tom left, he was in episodes, but he felt like he was kind of a B-tier character by that point. I know we're going to get angry emails about that, but
yeah, I think right. I think there wasn't a lot to necessarily tell in Tom and like Bart Rathbone's like narrative story, and Odyssey's become way bigger into like arcs, and like Eugene's like in the center of like arcs right now. So I would just kind of be surprised if they did that. I
would agree. So we're gonna move on.
The question is, will they find someone who like with like the new Wit, like with the Android Stoica? It seems like they said it was more about like the feel rather than the voice. I wonder if they're gonna do that with Eugene.
I would agree. I think the one problem with Eugene is it's gonna be very easy to do like a Poindextery stereotypical voice. Like Will Ryan sounds like that, but he also doesn't at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone, for that fun discussion. If you would like to send your thoughts or discussion questions, email them at anadventurethroughodyssey@gmail.com. And if you would like to support us on Patreon, I've officially decided, that you now get something audio for every tier. So at the $1 tier, you get all the episodes a week early and ad-free, or 3 days early and ad-free. At the $5 tier, you will get what we like to call our current thoughts. I don't know why I said what we like to call, because you know what that means. So it'll be our current thoughts on the album currently airing. So I believe the day we're recording this is the day before the release of 28 Hours. So we're going to do episode by episode reactions to that one. And our yearly recap of the club episodes. Maybe we'll even do a monthly recap of the club episodes of this if people are paying for that. And then anything. Sorry, what?
Probably.
Yeah. And anything current-ish Odyssey brings out. So there's that. And then at the $7 tier, you get what I like to call the Month in Odyssey, where we look over the news, anything that maybe happened on the podcast, or updates on things going on, like the recent news about the blog post, which actually we'll cover in a second. And we're going to react to that month's Elsewhere in Odyssey comics, which if you don't know what this is, Focus is putting out official comics about what the characters are doing in Odyssey, and they're like little joke panels, but I like the idea of them. Yeah, so just to give you a taste of what that might be, John, did you see what's happening with the Adventures in Odyssey message boards?
I did not see.
So since January, they've been teasing a revamp to the club, and it kind of feels like there have been some issues with the website design that's making it take longer than they thought. So things keep getting pushed. They keep trying to be exciting on Instagram, like look at this redesign of this character from 20 years ago, because I think something's happening on the club. Which I like the idea of maybe them putting comics or more exclusive little stories on the club that don't necessarily require them to record with the actors.
Yeah.
But Bob from the Odyssey podcast posted a video saying, so unfortunately, because our moderators are so busy, we're only going to have 5 or 6 discussion boards on the new club as opposed to 200 because it's impossible to transfer everything over. So 2 things. 1, there were discussion boards. 2, I do think there was probably a tech thing with it, but I also think this was just an easy time for them to cut a lot of the fat out of the message boards and let the moderators have a small break.
Yeah.
Because I also thought like
how can I be a moderator on these message boards?
Contact them, I guess.
Nah, I don't want that.
I'm assuming they've got interns doing it, so
yeah.
But
they're like, I am so excited to work at Focus on the Family. What are you doing? You're moderating the Adventures in Odyssey message boards. I didn't know that was a thing. There's like 5 people and like 5 moderators.
Well, and I could not find them, and I didn't do a lot of digging. The way the video made it sound is like that is the primary form of communication for a lot of Odyssey fans. And it occurred to me, if these fans are like 7 or 8, they're not exchanging phone numbers, probably. So,
yeah.
So like I do, and this might turn into like a disaster. Do they want to make like an instant messaging feature on the new club? Because they're clearly trying to turn it into a slight social media platform.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll be curious to see what happens when the new version of the club eventually launches. But
let me say this. I feel like any entrance of any sort of social media or social boards, I feel like it's just going to cause the Odyssey fan base to deteriorate.
That's
more so than this podcast, even.
I don't think we're causing the fan base to deteriorate that much.
I think we're doing the fan base no favors.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like they've made fun of us in any episodes yet.
Yeah.
Yet being the key word. Okay. So, yes, anyway, that's all the fun. Join us on Patreon, where this month we'll discuss the July episode and a couple episodes of 28 Hours, which I will say the July episode is another Poll House mystery, so his third time the charm.
I thought the Poll House episodes have been fine.
No, I meant is like the third time going to be where it burns out.
Oh, okay.
So I think the first one's great. I think the second one's pretty good. I could see the third one maybe stretching it.
Will they be able to cinch the trilogy?
Yeah, but the photo seems to, I haven't listened to it yet, but the photo appears to have Jillian in it, so.
Interesting.
Anyway, we're going to start the actual episode now with episode 13, Bobby's Valentine. Young Bobby gets a note from Amy, who thinks he's the cutest boy in school. Bobby, however, wants to stay as far from Amy as possible.
I mean, I think this episode's fine. Okay. So, there's, I don't know. It's like weird, right?
I mean, remember, it was remade with Jimmy a few years later, but.
Yeah, I feel like, this is obviously a Harley episode that was then remade.
Yes. Now, Harley's hiding in bushes in this episode, so.
I do feel like Harley's interaction's kind of bad here. It's the throwing mud thing for Eugene, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, although Harley says that in this episode too, but it is more associated with Eugene because it's a callback later on.
Oh, is it? I thought he said something else. Maybe it was like maybe the preface it was different.
That's very possible.
I just listened to it and being like, that's weird how they phrase it or something like that.
Oh yeah. So
I think it's fine. I think I feel like the ending of this episode is not particularly memorable.
that she has a crush on Officer Harley, or they kind of make her a flake?
I think just the whole thing. I think it's weird they also made the crush on Officer Harley.
I agree. And for all the girls who just threw their phones across the room, I did not mean flake. I meant, look, it's generally portrayed in media. I don't know how accurate this is, that little girls will have crushes that fizzle out very quickly. I do, however, think it is a bit of a narrative cop out to have Wit tell Bobby, to let her down easily, and then she just moves on without him having to do anything.
That's fair. You're talking about the media trope.
Yes.
Though I think you could make that clearer for the future. I don't like when you drop these controversial things and then have to backtrack because you don't think before you speak, Will. We're talking about things that we don't like how people do the podcast.
Okay. So it's the media trope, and I like that the episode gives you a way, like, tries to be about how to healthfully let someone down. However, I think it's dulled a little bit by the fact that Bobby is basically told she wants to leave him before he can say anything.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of like, I think it's so like they were probably like, well, this would be good, but that we have to end the episode, and they're like, oh, let's just do this cop out.
Well, that literally.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, maybe instead of the crush on Officer Harley joke, or her giving this like very, she clearly heard these words on TV speech, he gets at least a couple sentences into it, then she's like, don't worry, I've found another. But we'll have more to say when it comes to Jimmy, the episode where it's Jimmy, because obviously that's the canon version now. So
yeah, it's hard, especially this episode. I think it's good we had a little like pre-discussion, because a lot of these are just original versions that were then remade, and the remade version's technically the canon version.
That's true. All right. Missed it by that much. Middle schooler Rachel Weaver is late for everything, but when Connie threatens to kick her off the volleyball team, Rachel tries her very best to be on time.
So what surprised me about this is, because I did not remember that this was originally a Harley episode, was that the whole Twilight Zone thing started so early.
Yes, I agree.
Like, at this point, it didn't really seem like Odyssey did as much stuff like that.
I would agree, and I think it's one of the first really outlandish moments, but it's also a dream sequence.
Exactly. It's similar to how the first history episode is a kid gets knocked out.
Yeah, and I've definitely got thoughts about that when we get to it, but you are right. And it being a dream sequence is fine. Like, obviously every Twilight Zone episode is like a kid's radio story or mentioned as a story within the universe.
Yeah. I like it. I think it's cool that it was so early. I just never even processed it, because I think the remake's in like volume like 9 in like the new canon or something.
Right, and they don't. My one thing is I like the idea of this episode, but they don't do a lot to change this one, and they probably could have used a few brushes up on the script.
Yeah.
Like, I know we said this back when we originally covered it a couple years ago, but it is notable that, like, hey, Rachel is a child and maybe it can't be responsible for getting herself there on time.
It's true. I think the implication is like, oh, she could bike from school or something, right. But I agree.
I don't disagree, and I also know it was the 80s, so things were different. Whereas, like, today, I'm not going to say where our church is, I would not be mad at a kid who's late because their parents had to drive them, just because we live in an area where it's hard to bike anywhere.
Now, this is probably, though, for a high school volleyball team.
Yes. Or middle school.
Well, yeah, because it's interesting, because Connie's supposed to be, like, 16, so she must be, like, as a high schooler, coaching the middle school team, which is interesting.
I actually agree with that. I hadn't thought about that.
Because in album 9, like, Connie has developed more as a character, where like you kind of get away with that a little more.
Yes.
where like by this time that seems strange that she's like so responsible as like a character, because at this point we've really only had her introduction in a few episodes where it's like she's more teenager-ish.
That's a very good point, actually. Huh. Yeah, Connie's
It just gives
development
the
is
episode a
certainly
really
interesting.
weird different context.
Huh. I mean, we've all had teenage volunteers and stuff, but yeah, I definitely.
Well, true.
I had not thought about that. Huh.
Hmm.
All right. My brother's
It was
keeper.
originally written to be pre-Christian Connie.
Yes, I hadn't thought about that. Huh. Anyway, my brother's keeper. Philip Callis gets angry during baseball practice and tells his younger brother Dean to go home. When Dean doesn't return home, the police get involved and try to track down the boy.
Dean, what's the matter with you?
Well, you are right. I'm trying to think.
I mean, so I don't think this is at the same degree level, but this episode does remind me a little bit of the Arthur episode.
Which one?
Where where Arthur punches DW.
I was thinking of the whistle episode.
I mean, there's a little bit of that. I mean, there is like the thing where it's like Dean is doing something that's wrong by playing with his brother's thing that's also like for a school assignment after he was told no, and Philip should not have sat on his brother, obviously. The mom's just like, he's just a little boy, and it's like, yeah, but also like you should tell Dean like, hey, don't play with your brother's things. Obviously, like, Philip shouldn't sit on him. And then
Yes.
I will say this. I am slightly mad at the mother. And I think this was more of a big thing back then, but where she was like, you have to take him to baseball practice, just like on a whim. Like, I do think there's a thing where parents need to like respect their kids' time a little bit, or at least like tell him in advance, like you may have to take him to baseball, not just like, well, I don't have time to watch him right now, so you do it. And then like later in the episode, she's like, you weren't watching him. It's like, well, he was at like, not like, obviously he shouldn't have let Dean run off, but like he was at baseball practice and wouldn't have been able to watch him for the whole time at baseball practice too. So it's just weird. It's kind of a weird situation.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Tangled Web was fictional in universe, but the mom didn't have time to walk to the market with the little brother, but she had time to wait all day for the son to get back from school with the flower. At that point, why not just go to Wit's End? But
exactly.
I should have mentioned that in the last episode, but I do agree with that. That the school, he might have lost part of his report, which would not be great. Again, Odyssey's a smaller town, and it's the nostalgic times. Maybe the writers remember doing this.
It's true, yeah.
Yes. The one thing, and this goes back to the Dental Dilemma episode, Dean is 6, and I know 6-year-olds aren't super eloquent, but he is sort of written like he's 4.
I think a 6-year-old could act like this. I think it's less so than the Dental Dilemma. But I do think I could believe Dean is a precocious 6-year-old.
I think it's also just his voice.
It's true. At this era, when they had like a young character, they were like, they will sound very young. Like they will have almost a lisp.
Maybe that's part of it. Like I would buy he's 6 and did everything the same if his voice just sounded a little less, goodbye, Philip.
Yeah.
So
I do think the end of the episode punches pretty well. I think it's like a good situation, I think because Philip did like do a dumb thing and let him like walk home by himself, and like,
yes,
it was a good like kind of redemptive moment without being like too over the top, where it was like, yeah, Dean fell like in a hole. It's like, okay, that's like somewhat realistic.
Yes. Yeah,
Is this
it's a
the
very.
episode where Wit goes, "Hurry, boy, hurry"?
I think so. But this is
Okay.
also notably, I think, the only time Wit's sister is mentioned before Wilson shows up.
Yeah, I think there may be like one or two other times, but I do think it's rarely mentioned, right? This is like one of the few times.
Okay, I'm checking her wiki page. Yeah, so she was in a few Wit flashback episodes, but they have all been post reboot.
Okay. It's like one of those things that like they're like, oh, we'll have Wit have a sister, and like just never felt the need to add it again.
Yes, I do. I at least believe it was probably on the original document, and they just kind of never brought it up again. But
Yeah,
because
it's weird even though with like the episode with Wit's like stepmother,
she's
that
not
it's just
brought
like
up.
her sister's just not there.
Yeah, so and actually we'll talk about this in the next episode. Wit's sister is in my mind a good example of how not to do retroactive continuity.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas something in the next episode I think is a really good example of how to do retroactive continuity, which we'll get to. Anything else you want to say about this episode?
No, I think that was pretty good.
All right. No stupid questions. Chris Gotteblay, a man in a wheelchair, and Meg Stevens, a girl with a lot of questions, form an odd friendship when they help each other out.
Yes.
It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, just a weird weird premise if she's like, I'm just in roller skates and I'm accidentally gonna cause this man in a wheelchair to fall over.
Yeah, it's a little insensitive.
I'll say this. I kind of like having a cynical character in Odyssey.
Agreed.
Like a cynical adult, like where it's not like he's like an awful person or like as a villain, but like right, he's had like a hard life, and like I actually would not have minded this character like sticking around to kind of like.
Well, remember this was Family Portraits.
Right. It was a Family Portraits episode, but
I
don't know, like let's see what you're gonna say.
Oh, I mean, we got that a little later with Bernard.
It's true. Like, right. Bernard is that. And maybe that's why. But like this guy's even more cynical. What's funny is I'm looking on the wiki and apparently like the actor who played the guy is unknown.
That is interesting.
It must be like someone who worked at Focus or like someone's friend.
True.
Or something like that.
The wiki page is even better because it just says personality. Chris was sometimes grumpy.
I'll also say this is funny. On the trivia, it says Chris is the first Odyssey character in a wheelchair who reveals that he was a car accident. This foreshadows the experience of Zachary Sellers, who revealed that he was in a car accident. That's not what foreshadowing is.
That's a parallel.
Yeah, it's like the George Lucas. It all rhymes, like sort. It's like poetry. It rhymes. It's not a foreshadow. It's not like I was like, oh man, Chris like being a wheelchair due to a car accident foreshadowed Zachary being in a wheelchair in a car accident. It could also be that like probably that's a common way people end up in wheelchairs.
I also think in a weird way it encourages safe driving if it's a car accident.
It's true.
And maybe a car accident is also more believable because let's say he was like a handyman and fell off the roof and that's how he paralyzed himself. I could see that freaking some kid out whose dad is a handyman who works on the roof a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Fair.
Yes. And now I believe the first Odyssey two-parter, a member of the family, parts 1 and 2, Monty Whitaker comes to Wit's End to visit for the summer and learns a few lessons along the way.
I mean, classic.
Yes,
right?
it is. Yes, but it was also the series finale to Family Portraits, which I feel like I need to point out.
That's a good finale because it actually then instead we follow Wit interacting with all these other people, and for the first time we see actually a story revolving around Wit.
Yes, I would agree. And I also think it works because it feels like an Odyssey episode. It's honestly, and this is going to be a dumb parallel because it's an Odyssey podcast. It's like watching the first season of The Simpsons and then that Krusty Gets Busted episode happens. And it's, oh, this is what the show is going to be, even if there's a few rough edges.
Yeah.
And this feels like, out of the Family Portraits episodes, really the first one that feels like, oh, this is what Odyssey will become.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting because it definitely shows Wit as like a flawed character. They portray Wit as flawed, which as I said, it like makes sense with the Family Portraits thing. But I also think it's weird because I don't think they really do that much in the main show after this.
I would say this. They try.
I agree. But they kind of just leave it as probably like 97% of Wit's flaws revolve around his family.
That is a good point. And actually, the first episode we'll cover next week, I think tries to paint Wit a certain way, and they're almost committed to implying that version of Wit existed for a long time, but never quite go full bore on it.
Yeah.
But you are right. Like, in a weird way, it sounds like Wit was. They kind of make it feel like Wit might have been a bad father.
I think that's like a whole thing. I mean, they reference that at other times, like, or Wit at least did not connect or wasn't necessarily there for his daughter.
Right, because like you hear Jason talk about Wit, it's very different.
Yeah.
Like hide and seek was a nightmare when we were kids. Da 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 da. But
it's also interesting with like the spanking in this episode. It's so like anti what Wit feels like.
Well, it's supposed to be like an old school versus new school thing, and I feel like, and obviously this was the 80s and the feeling on spanking was probably different. It's Wit's grandson, like he would never spank a kid in Wit's End.
Right, but even as a grandson, like, and again, this is when they were still developing Wit's character, but it is like kind of stark because I could not imagine even if like Monty acted like this that Wit would do that nowadays. And I mean, I think that's supposed to show probably like some of his flaws as a father, which is what they were trying to paint as.
Right. Well, and because the wiki notes, Wit's parenting style versus that of Jana reflects old school versus modern, which if that's what you were going for, maybe lean into that a little harder.
Yeah, because I did not get that feel from the episode.
Well, because like if this episode were made today, Wit would get canceled for spanking. That'd be funny. Wit spanks somebody, gets canceled by Glossman and Brian Dern.
That'd be a pretty engaging episode. But don't you think, I mean, like, I feel like Wit nowadays would tell him, like, you should, like, you can't do that. And it's different, right? Because, like, if a kid did that at Wit's End, he would probably tell him, like, you're not welcome at Wit's End.
Yes.
But, like, how do you do that with your grandson?
It is true. Speaking of the Monty stealing money scene, originally it was Connie. So they recorded it in Family Portraits with Jimmy. When they re-released it as Odyssey, it was Connie. Apparently, the Connie audio got lost. So they put in the old audio. Now, my whole thing is, maybe it was a union thing. They couldn't have Katie Lee record the 3 lines.
Maybe it was just someone being like, we'd have to pay her. Right. Or maybe they were just, this is easier.
Yeah, because it is just weird. This Jimmy character we never hear about again.
My guess is it was on like a tape. And it would have been a hassle to just go back in and edit it or something.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, at least it's not Connie because Connie, I don't know if Connie even at that point would be that foolish.
Yeah.
Good thing Wilson wasn't there. He would have condemned Connie and made her use the room of consequence.
I'm surprised it wasn't Officer Harley filling in.
You're right. Oh my, you're right.
Would have been funny. Or was Harley not in Family Portraits?
Harley was not in Family Portraits.
That's probably why.
Right. So it looks like this episode did not aired a few times, and in '99 was never aired again until it came out as part of the Classics album. So I kind of wonder if part of the reason it didn't get aired for a while was because they lost the Connie footage or something.
Maybe it was that. I also could see they were hesitant to like break the version of Wit they had, like the vision of Wit.
That's very possible as well.
Because I think they lean very much as like Wit just kind of being not this like all-knowing character, but like I don't think they really show him with that many faults until the Mortal Coil.
I would agree with that. You're right. That element works better at the end of Family Portraits, as we've been seeing Wit as like this grandfatherly character. Now let's give him a story.
Yeah.
So, and we'll talk about that more as we go along, because going episode by episode, it's very interesting to watch some Wit things they evolve.
Yeah.
And that wraps it up for this episode, I believe, unless you have anything else to say.
No, I think, good batch of episodes. Odd episodes to talk about because so many of them ended up being remade.
Absolutely.
Or never like formally released. Like My Brother's Keeper, whatever the episode was called, was in the Lost episodes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, again, a lot of good episodes. I think Member of the Family is both an interesting relic and an interesting moment in Odyssey, because it feels like, again, a thoroughly modern episode.
Yeah.
At least in this moment. Anyway, join us again next time in 2 weeks from now when we'll cover the next 6 episodes. And if you would like to hear us sooner, probably by this point, 28 hours will have started, so we'll have recorded an episode about that for our $5 and up patrons.
Or if the episode is on the podcast feed, I suppose our plans changed.
Yes, that too. If you have $1 or up, you can hear our discussion about Family Portraits next week from when this episode is posted. And if you're a $7 and up, by the time the episode we're discussing is posted, our July and Odyssey recap should also be available. So there's going to be a lot of content for our patrons. So why don't you toss us some money? That sounded really bad.
It did.
We would appreciate it if you gave us some money. Think of it as like a tithe.
Okay. That's the end of the episode. We're ending it before this goes any further.
Yeah, if you don't do it, the world will end.
The referenced an episode we probably won't get to for a while.
I know, but we all know which one we're talking about. Anyway, I'm Will.
I'm John.
We'll see you next time.